Hey everyone, Prof Sales coming at you with a book review. And today's book review is the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, written by Robert Kiyosaki. Now, I have to say, I saw this book many years ago and I picked it up at a bookstore and, leafed through it, but really didn't find that much that was that interesting to me. But now that I've gotten a little bit older, a little bit wiser, a little more perspective, I definitely found a lot of good information in this book. So I wanted to share with you what this book's about and maybe how you can use it to help you and develop a better mindset for being an entrepreneur, being in business, or being an investor. So in the book, the author talks about growing up as a youngster in Hawaii. And he grew up with two dads. Now, whether these dads are real or not is really immaterial, but one of his dads was rich and one of his dads was poor. However, they were not rich and poor in the sense of the word as we normally think of rich and poor. One of his dads was actually more of an academic, someone who had went to college, someone who had studied and who had spent some time teaching, and was generally thought of as a more traditional view of how to get employment, how to be successful in life. The other dad was someone who had dropped out of school at an early age and basically had found his way through investing and starting his own companies to basically find his way in the world. And the author tells us about his experiences with both of these dads and their perspectives on life. What I found interesting was that the author often would ping pong back and forth between one dad's view of a certain issue and then go back to the other dad's view of a certain issue. And the book is really about mindset, if not anything else. There's not as much nuts and bolts in this particular book in terms of you should go do exactly this, don't do that. But there's a lot of great information about how do you think about what is success? How do you become successful? What does wealth look like? How do you create it? How do you view money? How do you view basically your life? And I found a lot of great insight into this mindset of being rich, being wealthy. Now, being rich or wealthy means something different to everyone. It's based on lots of circumstances. It's not necessarily an absolute number that you may have in mind. And, oh, I'm wealthy when I make this much money or I have this much money in the bank. The author makes it quite clear that becoming wealthy is about changing your perception about how wealth is created. That the rich actually create money. They don't find it or make it. They actually create it out of nothing. And he gives an illustration of this. He and his friend were interested in comic books, and they were able to get some comic books from a local store, but the only thing was is that the comic book distributor told them, you can have these, but you're not allowed to sell them. And these two young enterprising entrepreneurs wanted to make some money. So what they did is they started a library where kids could come by and read comic books and pay a small fee. They could come by and read for an hour and read, 7, 8, 9, 10 comic books. So they found a way to create money out of, a circumstance that's normally a little challenging for people. Because a lot of us think, well, we're going to go to work, we're going to make money, and then we're going to take that money and we're going to use it to save, we're going to use it to put our kids through college, we're going to use it for retirement, we're going to use it to travel. But the reality is, as the author often points out, that a lot of times you just cannot make enough to really achieve your financial goals. And as long as you're working for someone else, you're not really in control of your financial destiny. So his rich dad gives him lots of life lessons and practical lessons around how to actually make money. He puts him to work at a crappy job making, 10 cents an hour, which even in the time the author was talking about, that was not very much money. And he gets very tired of it because the rich dad wanted his son to realize that, working for money for all those years is always going to seem like just a little. The answer is not to go get a better job or to make more money just through normal employment. The answer is to find ways to be creative, to make money on your own outside of the normal channels of, I've got to get a job and that's how I'm going to get my wealth. So the author, then goes into his somewhat of his history of how he started investing in real estate and real estate properties. He gives some examples of buying a property, renting it out, and then as the property appreciates, he's able to sell it and defer the taxes using, tax laws and regulations, and buying a bigger property, thus getting more income out of his new property. Plus, he's building a bigger and bigger portfolio of investments. And over time, the author eventually becomes one of the richest men in Hawaii and is able to live off of his investments. He also talks about dividend investing in the stock market, but he doesn't really go into a lot of detail about this. So I think there's a lot of great information in this book that revolves around mindset, changing your perception on how money is created, how wealth is created, and what you can do in general to retrain your brain basically to think differently. And that's very useful. But there's not a lot of nuts and bolts in this book. So let's go into the review and let me give you some specific ratings in 3 different areas. So first off, let's talk about the mindset changing ability of this book. This book definitely challenges your mindset and challenges you to change your mindset in regards to wealth and how it's created. So for that reason, I give it 4 out of 5 stars. I think there's definitely a lot of valuable information here in terms of how you should be thinking about money, wealth, investments, and basically your overall financial picture. If you take nothing else away from this book, you definitely can come away with a different appreciation for how wealth is created and how you may be able to change your thought processes and therefore your actions, and thus become a wealthier person and have investments, possibly in real estate or stock investments and so on, that can build wealth for you even when you're not working. So I think the mindset element of this book is pretty good, thus the 4 out of 5 star rating. How about inspiration? Is it inspiring? Well, I didn't really get a tremendous amount of inspiration out of it. I mean, it's great to hear that someone had a mindset revelation and then their life was forever changed for it. I think that's pretty inspiring, actually. But because we didn't see all the particulars of the author's struggle, we saw him from an early age and then he kind of jumped forward to, pretty much adulthood, that we didn't really get a good feel for how he maybe had struggled and persevered himself from a kid to a young adult to an adult. So the story wasn't as inspiring as I'd hoped for. So I give it 2 out of 5 stars for inspiration. There is some inspiring things in it, but that's not really, I don't think that's the point of the author's, his thesis in this book. Last but not least, nuts and bolts. What good information can you take to go and use in your business, to use in investing and so on? He does give some 10 rules that you need to follow, and they're basically mindset rules. They're not so much nuts and bolts. There really wasn't a lot of nuts and bolts, say, this is how you evaluate a stock or a real estate, an income producing property. There's really not any nuts and bolts to speak of. And because that wasn't the author's intention in this, so I'm going to only give it 1 out of 5 stars for nuts and bolts, because it just wasn't the point he was trying to prove. But still, I have to give him a rating that's fair, given on, did it provide you with specific information? And I would say largely it did not. So in conclusion, I would say that this was a very good book. I mean, it was good for what it's designed to be, but it's not going to hit maybe all the areas that you may need, depending on your journey from, maybe being a worker bee to becoming an investor or an entrepreneur, or getting involved in real estate or the stock market. Nothing wrong with that. It just means that you may need to look elsewhere to go for the nuts and bolts and maybe a little bit more of the inspiration that you will need to get into those areas, if that is in fact your desire, if you want to follow the author's path. Still a good read. It's a quick read. I would definitely recommend it, and I hope that this review has been helpful for you. All right, guys, well, that's going to do it for now, and this is Prof Sales, and I will see you soon.